So let me ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself saying things like, oh gosh, why am I never good enough? Or I am so stupid. Why did I do that? Or I just can never get it right. What's wrong with me? Now, I want you to take those thoughts and I want you to flip them and imagine saying that to a friend. You're just never good enough. You're just so stupid. You just can never get anything right. What's wrong with you? You probably wouldn't say that to a friend. But if we're honest, we tend to be our own harshest critic. We tend to say things to ourselves that are just demoralizing and frankly, wrong. But I need you to understand that the words that we speak over ourselves, they really truly shape how we see ourselves. And negative self-talk can keep you stuck in cycles of doubt, cycles of fear, anxiety, depression, and discouragement, even insecurity. But here's the good news, and this is what we're going to do today in this episode. Just because those thoughts come to you doesn't mean that you have to believe them. You do not have to come into agreement with every negative thing that you think about yourself. So today, it's going to be just me, and we're going to dive into the truth of how to overcome negative self-talk and how to replace that with God's truth. Because when we learn how to control our thoughts, we will truly learn how to change our lives. So get ready, because I believe this conversation is going to change everything for you. Hey y'all, real quick, I want to make sure that you know that if you enjoy my content, if you enjoy this podcast, if you even enjoy what I share on social media or in my e-newsletters, you need to become part of my Patreon community. My Patreon community is an exclusive community that will give you access to even more content that I make available publicly. You'll get early access to my podcasts on at least a monthly basis. I'm hosting a live Q&A to recap the conversations that I'm having, and you can join at different membership tiers depending on your budget, all right? So I want you to consider joining my Patreon community because I would love to connect with you in a deeper way. All right, now back to the conversation because it's going to be good. So I want to start here. I want to start with just understanding what self-talk is and the power of self-talk. You may not realize it because it's unconscious, right? But you are constantly speaking to yourself. You may not realize it, but you are constantly telling yourself something about your environment, the people in it, and even you. So self-talk is the way that your mind processes the experiences that you may be having. And the reality is that because we're human, we have to overlay all of the experiences that we have with some sort of meaning, or else we start to feel uncomfortable. So if someone cuts us off in traffic, right? We actually assign meaning to what happened without even realizing it. And we tell ourselves that meaning. So if somebody cuts us off in traffic, we say, oh, that person is such a jerk. Okay. We have now given that person a personality flaw because we've said that they are a jerk. But by explaining it as that person is such a jerk, now we can make sense of what they did because that's the type of thing that jerks do. Or we can also explain it as, oh, that person must be having a really bad day and maybe they're just in a rush. Again, we don't know what's actually happening, but the ability to tell ourselves what's happening helps us to make sense of the situation. So self-talk is something that we do naturally. It's not something we have to think about. It happens automatically. But if you were to actually pay attention to the thoughts that you think, you would be surprised by how they're kind of negative by default. More often than not, especially when we have a bad experience, that bad experience becomes something we ruminate on and we assign meaning to it because that's, of course, natural. But if we're not careful, we will assign meaning to it that makes that thing our fault. Here's an example, going back to getting cut off in traffic. So the person cuts you off. You say, oh my gosh, that person is such a jerk. But then we think, well, but maybe I shouldn't have been in this lane. And it was because I was in this lane that this person cut me off. Oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. Why did I stay in this lane longer than I should have stayed in this lane? We end up going down this just spiral of negativity because we've constructed this entire narrative that makes the situation our fault. And we have to guard against that. Because the truth is, in most situations, we probably do have some responsibility, but we don't have all responsibility for everything that goes wrong in life. Negative self-talk actually helps us think through situations, but it assigns the blame to us, or it causes us to view other people through the lens of their faults and their flaws. So I wanted to start there with just what negative self-talk is, where it comes from. And I need you to know that it is powerful because it creates our reality. You know, Proverbs 18:21 says that life and death are in the power of the tongue. Well, the word that's translated power is actually the Hebrew word yad, and it means hand. And so what that verse is saying is that life and death are in the hand of the tongue. What does a hand do? A hand shapes, it molds, it builds, but it also destroys. The same hand that can build a house can actually take a hammer and tear it down. The same hand that can pat someone on the back reassuringly can actually pull a trigger and kill somebody. And so a hand is a neutral instrument, but it shapes according to the person's inner thought life, which is why that tells us that life and death are in the hand of the tongue. The question is, how are you using the hand of your mental tongue? Are you speaking life over yourself? Are you creating life through the words that you say? Or are you speaking death and creating death over yourself through the words that you say? Now, one of the things I want you to think about is, where does negative self-talk come from, right? Like, where does it come from? Where does it originate? One of the ways that you're going to take authority over the negative thoughts that you think is you have to begin asking yourself, where did that come from? Where did that thought come from? Why did I immediately think that I was to blame for that person's choice? Or why did I immediately assume the worst about that person's intentions? Where did that come from? And so often our negative thoughts don't even originate with us. They're seeded into us by other people. If you were to actually take a step back and take inventory of the thoughts that you think about yourself, you would realize that you don't just think you're stupid because that's just something you came up with. It's probably because somebody somewhere in your past spoke those words over you and you came into agreement with their assessment. And when you came into agreement with their assessment of you, your mind, the hand, right? Remember, your tongue is a hand. Well, your mind is a hand. It actually grabbed onto the words that they said and it held tightly onto them and it made those words your identity. So we have to understand where those thoughts come from so that we can actually begin to take authority over them and uproot them. Because many times the thoughts that we think about ourselves are thoughts that were seeded into us that we've simply ruminated on, and we've allowed that seed to become a harvest. And so it's not even that the person continues to say those things over us, but it's the negative self-talk that repeats those things over us again and again and again. We do all have an inner self-critic. We all have an inner self-critic. I don't care how confident a person may seem. Listen, I've had people tell me over and over again, oh my gosh, Nona, you just seem so confident. You seem like you have it all together. If you could hear the thoughts that I think about myself most of the time, you would be like, she's a mess. We all have an inner self-critic, but we have to get good at overcoming and confronting that self-critic. We have to get really good about overcoming it, but we have to start by acknowledging it and recognizing it. When I think that thought, as a matter of fact, this morning, just to give you a concrete example, had a situation come up with my husband, and normally my default would be, oh my gosh, he meant to do that, and he's always doing this, and he's always doing that. But I actually caught myself in the middle of the spiral, and I said, wait a minute. Where did that thought come from? And does that thought actually serve me in this season? Does that thought actually serve the vision of creating a healthy marriage? And so I caught myself in the middle of the spiral, and instead of allowing my thoughts and the negative talk that I was hearing in my mind, instead of allowing that to have the attention and the focus that I would give it in the past, I just decided to have a conversation with my husband. And that conversation revealed that my interpretation of the situation was actually wrong. But what negative self-talk will have you do is it will actually have you create a pattern of believing lies. Oftentimes they are lies, believing lies that then create your reality. I think back on the difficult seasons I've had in my marriage, and I got to be honest, it wasn't even what happened. It wasn't the issue that was the issue. It was what I believed about the issue that was really the issue. Because we can work through disagreements, we can work through challenges, but when I believe that you meant to do that, when I believe that you are malicious toward me, now we actually have a different problem. And that's where negative self-talk can start to create a reality that does not serve you. But this is why, again, I want to start with just understanding the nature of the power of self-talk. Self-talk literally creates your reality. Because what it does is it shapes the way that you see the world, and it creates an explanation for why people do what they do, why I do what I do. And if that is how I believe, then that is my reality, right? So that's the first part. Now, how do we actually begin to break free from destructive thought patterns? Again, the first step is acknowledgement, recognizing that there is power in how I think, there is power in what I say over myself, but then acknowledging what it is that I'm thinking and asking the question, where did that thought come from? Because if it didn't come from me, if it didn't originate with me, it had to come from somewhere. So where did it come from? Now, from there, we have to begin to intentionally break those destructive thought patterns. And in Proverbs 23:7, it says that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. I'm going to say that again. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. If you're finding yourself feeling anxious, chances are it's because you are actually ruminating on anxious thoughts. If you're finding yourself feeling depressed, chances are it's because you're ruminating on anxious thoughts. If you are feeling discouraged, chances are it's because you're ruminating on discouraging thoughts. As we think in our heart, that's how we are. And so the first step to really breaking the pattern of negative self-talk and destructive thinking is that we have to actually stop ruminating on negative thoughts and destructive thought patterns. We have to stop ruminating on it. I had a situation recently where something that I had my heart set on, it didn't happen. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, these things never go the way that I want them to go. Why do I even have hope in these things? It's never going to work out. And I found myself so discouraged. Like I was feeling discouraged. I was feeling anxious. I was feeling hopeless. I was feeling helpless. Here's the thing. I know Jesus. I love the Lord. I love God. And yet I was struggling with feeling hopeless and helpless, even though I know that God controls everything. I was still feeling hopeless and helpless. And I'm sharing this with you because I don't want you to think that something is wrong with you because you default to a negative thought pattern. I do the same thing. But the difference is I am now in a position to be aware of it and to stop it in its tracks. So in that situation, when it didn't work out and I immediately was like, oh my gosh, these things never work out. Why do I even have hope about these things? It never works out. I stopped and I said, wait a minute. I know that God is for me. I know that God loves me. I know that God has been merciful toward me in situations where I actually deserved punishment, and yet God withheld it. And so if that is the type of God that I serve, I have to have hope, because he is the type of God who loves me beyond my faults and my frailties. He's the type of God who opens doors that no man can shut. He's the type of God who has given me a platform that I never thought I would possibly ever have. He is that type of God. And so I was able to recognize when the destructive, negative self-talk was starting, and I was able to stop it in its tracks and begin to replace that rumination with the truth of who God is. And that's step one, is you have to recognize when it happens and be willing to stop it in its tracks. So as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Hey, listen, I'm inserting myself in this conversation for just a minute because if you're enjoying this conversation and if you enjoy the many conversations that I host through my podcast, I want to invite you to join me for my free virtual masterclass, How to Bounce Back Better. My mission in life is to help you and people like you discover the power within you to not just go through stuff, not just survive, but I want you to learn how to grow through stuff, how to thrive. How to Bounce Back Better is an hour-long virtual masterclass, and I offer multiple sessions every single week. If you want to register, all you have to do is head over to nonajones.com, and you will see a big link, a big button that says free masterclass. Just click the button, and you can sign up today. I want to see you in the next masterclass because I promise you there are tools, tactics, strategies, and tips that have helped me build resilience that I want to give to you. So again, head over to nonajones.com to click the big free masterclass button and get signed up today. All right, now back to the conversation. Here's the thing. Do not ignore those negative thoughts because they're real. Those negative thoughts are real. They are a part of you, whether they've been seeded into you by somebody else, or maybe there's something that you've just been ruminating on and you've come into agreement with it, whatever it is. Those negative thoughts are actually a part of you, so don't ignore them. But it's just like if you had a beautiful garden of roses and weeds start to grow up. If you ignore the weeds, eventually they're going to choke out the roses. The problem is not that the weeds are there. The problem is if you leave them there, all right? So we're not going to ignore them. Some of the practical steps that I would recommend you start to take to really challenge and replace those negative thoughts is you have to recognize that no matter how bad things get, God is a God of hope. No matter how bad things get, God has made you a promise that he will work all things together for your good and for his glory. Remember this, God does not get glory just because you suffer. God gets glory because your suffering produces perseverance, because your suffering produces character, because your suffering produces resilience. But that can only happen if you trust God through the process. So I need you to first and foremost commit to trusting God through the process. When bad things happen and that thought comes to you that things will never work out, you're not good enough, I'm not smart enough, everybody's against me. When that happens, know that that is a lie and that God is for you. That's the first step. Know that God is for you. Secondly, you have to understand that when things happen, as bad as they may seem, as horrible as they may seem, and I'm going to tell you a story in a moment to underscore what I'm about to say, as horrible as they may seem, because God is good and because God is faithful, he has a way of making even the worst experience work for the good of your future and your purpose. I'm going to tell you what I mean. My husband and I, we were married for 5 years before we decided to start having children. And we just assumed that it would be an easy process, right? Like biologically, I'm a woman, he's a man, we just come together and we have a child. Well, that's not what happened. Months and months went by without me getting pregnant, so much so that eventually we went to a fertility doctor and had her do some tests and found out that I was infertile. I was not releasing eggs because I had a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not, but it's PCOS for short. And so I was not releasing eggs that could be fertilized, right? So I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. But the doctor said, listen, I've seen a certain medicinal treatment work that has helped women with PCOS get pregnant. So, got the prescription. And before I could even take one pill, this was maybe 2 weeks later, before I could take one pill, I just took a pregnancy test just to take it. Well, it turns out I was pregnant. I got pregnant. I was so excited, went back to the fertility specialist maybe a couple of weeks after I got the positive result. And we didn't just see one heartbeat on the screen, y'all, we saw two. I was pregnant with twins. I wasn't supposed to get pregnant at all. I got pregnant with twins. Well, we went back for, I think, our 8-week checkup, and we were just so excited. Y'all, we were so excited that my husband and I actually went and bought like this big SUV because we were like, we're going to have twins. We got to have space. So we went back to our 8-week appointment, so excited to see our babies and see their heartbeats. Y'all, there were no heartbeats. No heartbeats. I cannot even effectively describe, if you've never lost a pregnancy before, I cannot effectively describe the depth of despair. Because you have to understand, we were at the height of optimism. I mean, God literally did something that we were told would never happen. He allowed me to get pregnant with twins, only for me to lose both babies. It was absolutely devastating. Well, then I got pregnant with my son, who's actually walking in the background. He's now 15 years old, but got pregnant with him. And he was born at 2 pounds and 9 ounces, 3 months early. 2 pounds, 9 ounces. I gave birth to him. Devastating time. He was in the NICU for 3.5 months. We thought we were going to lose him like 3 times. Through the grace of God, he was discharged, clean bill of health. Well, I got pregnant again with another boy. And at 20 weeks of pregnancy, I ended up having to go into the hospital and deliver him because my bag ruptured, my cervix had opened. I was like 9 centimeters dilated at 20 weeks. I couldn't keep the pregnancy. I had to literally deliver my son. And we watched my son with his last heartbeat. We just watched until his heart stopped beating. Horrible, absolutely horrible. And through that experience in losing my son, through that experience, the doctors realized that the reason why I gave birth to my oldest son so prematurely is because I had incompetent cervix. My cervix was unable to hold the weight of the baby. And so when I got pregnant with my youngest son, they did a stitch, a cerclage, a cervical stitch, and I was able to carry my baby to term. And that happened because when I delivered Daniel so early that he could not survive, it was only then that the doctors realized what happened with my first pregnancy. God knows I would have loved to have my baby boy. I would have loved that. But instead of being able to have him on earth, I'm going to meet him in heaven. And because of that experience, my youngest son was able to be born full term. And I share this with you simply because when you're in the thick of the thing, when you're in the pain, when you're in the despair, the disappointment, the discouragement, it can feel like everything is going wrong and nothing will ever go right. But the thing I want you to understand, and this is how you take power over those destructive thoughts. What I need you to understand is that God is Lord over everything. So even when it's horrible, even when it's bad, even when you're thinking, I'll never have a baby, I'll never be good enough, I'll never be healthy, I'll never, you start to think all these things. I need you to understand that God is the God of never. He is the God of the impossible. And this is how you begin to overcome those negative thoughts. So I want to leave you with just a couple of things. Because if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, and maybe this is something that you struggle with, like your thought life is something you actively struggle with. I want to leave you with 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 5. This is a verse that I meditate on regularly. It says, "We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We're not victims of our thoughts. We're not hopeless. We're not helpless. We're not the worst. We're not silly. We're not stupid. We're none of that. What I want you to start doing is, especially if the issue that you're wrestling with in your thought life is that you made a mistake, what I want you to begin doing is I want you to give yourself the grace that you would give to somebody else, to a friend. I said at the very beginning of this, we say things to ourselves that we would never say to somebody else. You would never say to somebody else, "You're not good enough. You're so stupid. You'll never be anything." We wouldn't say those things to other people, but we say those things to ourselves. I need you to give yourself the grace to know that you did the best you could. You did the best that you could. And I need you to speak that over yourself when you start to say those things to yourself that you wouldn't say to somebody else. I did the best that I could. If I knew better, I would have done better, but I didn't know better, so I did the best that I could. Give yourself that grace. I pray that this has been a blessing to you. I pray this has been a blessing for you. And if this episode has spoken to you in some way, if it's ministered to you in some way, I just want to ask you to subscribe to this podcast. I would love for you to give it a rating. Tell your friends about it, because my entire heart, my entire mission for this podcast is to simply provide a safe space where you can be encouraged, where you can receive the truth, because I know you are bombarded with lies from the enemy. I want you to receive the truth that no matter how negative your thoughts may be, you have the power to replace them with the truth of God's word. I love you. I'm grateful for you tuning in, and I hope that this was a blessing for you. Thanks for watching. Hey friend, thank you so much for listening and maybe even watching this episode of The Nona Jones Show. If you enjoyed this conversation, I want to encourage you to become a member of my Patreon community. You see, on Patreon, you're not only going to get full-length episodes of my podcast, but you will also get early access to any new content that I share, including new podcast episodes, sermons, even behind-the-scenes clips of my travels. And depending on the tier at which you join, you will also be invited to some live Q&A conversations that I have with my Patreon community. So what I want you to do is head over to patreon.com/Nona Not Nora to get signed up today. I want to see you in my community. Thanks for being here.